Hi everyone, today we're covering the Miyoo Mini handheld. The Miyoo Mini is a brand new handheld from the guys behind the Pocket Go and BitBoy line of handhelds previously. The box is pretty nice, everything well packaged with some neat little additions to the unboxing like a micro SD to USB stick, which is useful if you're new to transferring anything to or from the device. Spec wise, the Miyoo Mini has a 4:3 2.8 inch display at 640 by 480 resolution. A 1900 mAh battery, which will give you around 4 hours of gaming and enough processing power to handle everything up to and including PlayStation 1. So straight out of the box, the Miyoo Mini looks great. I've got the Game Boy DMG style version here and it looks absolutely awesome. First impressions are great. Immediately in the hand it feels really well built. There's no rattles or thin plastic to the shell. The screen looks very premium due to the tiny bezels. And there's a nice weight distribution and good input placement throughout, which is ideal for making these mini handhelds actually payable. On the back we've got 4 shoulder buttons, which again are solidly placed within the shell with no rattling when shaking. The L2 and R2 buttons are slightly raised from the L1 and R1 counterparts, which is neat and stops you from pressing all buttons simultaneously, unless you do press within the middle of both buttons. The placement does make the L2 and R2 the most comfortable of the shoulder buttons though, so I'm sure remappings will be preferred for the majority. We've also got a replacement battery, easily accessible from the back, which is always an awesome bonus, and the plastic covering is quite thick and seems sturdy, which will hopefully stop it from becoming weak and falling off after significant use. On the bottom we've got the headphone jack, micro SD slot and USB-C charging port. On the left side we've got a very neat volume wheel, which is always my preference, and on top the power button with 3 LEDs to show off how much battery you've got left. All in all, the build quality for the Miyoo Mini is way above its price base, which is around $50 to $60, and is definitely impressive. Onto the controls, the D-pad is pretty good. There's enough resistance there to offer a good all-round experience. A full press doesn't recess the D-pad straight into the case, and the travel between multiple directions is positive. I would have liked to see just a little bit more resistance to get a bit more consistency between the feedback from the D-pad and the buttons, and the directional arrows and centre circle in the D-pad were a bit too deep for my personal taste, as it makes the travel between directions feel a bit more physically rough than it needs to, especially when in comparison to the buttons, which are glossy and smooth finished. The buttons are well spaced while being big enough to use comfortably, which is almost a rarity seen on smaller handhelds. There's a good resistance to the buttons, and the gloss feel makes for a comfortable button mashing. Combos are relatively easy to pay off, except for the cases where you need to press Y and X simultaneously. Hitting these buttons together while applying pressure to the upper left corners while doing so occasionally causes them to get caught together. All other combinations are fine though, but I thought it was worth mentioning for any mini fighter fans out there. My main use of gameplay on mini consoles are actually for grinding during the 8-bit and 16-bit era RPGs, so I largely play them one-handed while watching TV, and the Miyoo Mini is perfectly set up for this. You can comfortably rest the handheld on a little finger while playing one-handed and reach all the inputs you need to, which makes catching some retro Pokemon or the like a breeze. The start, select and menu buttons are good, each have a satisfying click to them, which next to no flex within the casing, which is great. As mentioned while going over the build quality, the shoulder buttons are a very good finish, but the L2 and R2 are the most naturally pressed. It's actually quite difficult to button mash the L1 and R1 buttons if you're not paying attention. Your fingers can easily glide off the edge while pressing the L1 and R1 buttons, which has caught me off guard a couple of times while playing an RPG one-handed. Overall though, the negatives towards the controls are largely only nitpicks rather than actually having any significant issues, and considering the size, the Miyoo Mini's got very good controls. So the stock OS on the Miyoo Mini is actually pretty nice overall and has everything you need to get a largely positive gameplay experience from the handheld, but it does have a couple of shortcomings. Firstly, the stock OS comes with both a list of native emulators and RetroArch cores, which is an absolutely awesome addition for the mini handhelds, but I couldn't actually get any RetroArch config settings to save, unfortunately. In addition, the native emulators all seem to be running at a 320 by 240 resolution with bilinear upscaling, which makes them appear a bit blurry, certainly not making the best out of the display. The stock OS also gives you the wrong impression of the device's mono speaker, as the volume levels are far higher than they actually should be, so there's severe audio distortion anywhere near the higher volume levels. Fortunately, the Miyoo Mini is being quickly adopted by the community though, so I'm sure there'll be custom firmware in the future which will address and improve these issues. Navigating around and using the stock OS is pretty self-explanatory. There's no significant loads anywhere, and there's some pretty neat quality of life settings in there, like being able to trigger both a sleep mode or full shutdown by just a press or a hold of the power button. Overall, the stock OS is far from a negative experience, and while there are issues present, it's very likely they will be addressed by the community in the future, and there is enough in the initial release to get a pleasant gameplay experience from. Before I jump straight to gameplay, I just wanted to show off a quick display comparison of the Miyoo Mini against a couple of my other smaller handhelds. There's a couple of software related issues which I'd say is holding the display of the Miyoo Mini back from reaching its full potential, but even with that said, I think the Miyoo Mini display really stands out against some of its peers. There's a cool overall finish, and the small bezels really make it seem bigger than it actually is. It comes across overall as a very premium, decent panel. Reading text isn't an issue, text appearing clear across all platforms, though the viewing angles of the display are somewhat limiting at sharp angles. Other than the viewing angles, I can only really fault the display on its contrast between the darkest and lightest tones, which does give it that cooler colour palette. It's still far better than I was expecting for the price range, and I'm overall very happy with the Miyoo Mini's display though. It's worth re-mentioning that the Miyoo Mini does have a mono speaker which currently distorts at higher volumes, but this will be fixable in any future custom firmware support, and overall the tiny mono speaker does an okay job. Alrighty, I'll cut to some gameplay now and summarise up at the end. So overall, I'm really impressed with the Miyoo Mini. It does so much, so well at such an affordable price point. Is it the best mini handheld you can buy? I'd say probably not. The Anbernic RG280V is still my favourite of the mini handhelds, but that's not to say the Miyoo Mini isn't the best choice overall. When it all comes down to it, if they were priced exactly the same, I'd choose the RG280V. With their current pricing, you're getting a very, very decent handheld for its price banding. So for that alone, I'd certainly recommend the Miyoo Mini, and can't wait for the Miyoo P60 to be coming out later this year. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.